Should Andrew return to royal duties? Would you like to see the Duke of York back in public life? 020-7862-2222 is the number. Tell us what you think. So, a couple of the front pages have the story today. Let me just show you the Sun if I can. Air Miles Andy cleared for takeoff is what they've got. And the Mirror has victims' fury as Epstein probe is shut down. So, obviously, FBI, that's all about. They decided not to look into it further. This is the story that Prince Andrew will face no charges because the FBI have said, no, we've now looked at the associates and they have not committed any crimes. Andrew had always denied any wrongdoing, but for the last few years, he's largely stayed out of the public eye and hasn't travelled overseas. In 2022, he paid £12 million to Virginia Giuffre after she repeatedly claimed he'd abused her when she was 17. The agreement was made without Andrew accepting any wrongdoing. It was all around a famous photo, which we probably can find in our files somewhere, of him with his arm around Giuffre, who then became Virginia Roberts, and she sadly died recently as well. That
was terrible.
Horrific story.
Awful, and you kept thinking, that poor girl, what a life she's had, and it ended so tragically with apparently an abusive husband and all sorts of things.
Yeah, well, I don't know about that, but she was 17 in the photo. We need to get that photo, by the way. 17 in the photo with Andrew. That would not be allowed under American law in the state that she was in. However, it's not clear whether or not they were physically intimate. Obviously, she says they were. So we're left with a bit of a puzzle over that photo. And I suppose, Ron, the key issue for Andrew is he paid the money to her.
Well, Jeremy, I'm actually very uncomfortable about this story just because, I love the royal family. And this story has kind of muddied the waters and it's really put a stain on what the king has to go through the last few years, what Prince William and his wife have had to go through the last few years. And I think this, to me, he shouldn't return. I think he should be by choice if he's a moral person, which I believe he has shown in the past to have been, obviously not this particular case, but I think he ought to just retire quietly from...
Because it all now comes down to this photo, right? And she was 17 at the time. As discussed, sadly, she died just a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
And there's, of course, in the background, there is Ghislaine Maxwell, who is now in jail in New York, because she was in very deep with Epstein, who was a paedophile, and she facilitated his activities and acted as his madam. But we're still left with this question mark over Andrew. I don't know what's fair here.
Look, I mean, all that's happened is that the FBI has decided not to press charges. That doesn't change his behaviour or what he did or what we wonder about what he did. And it occurs to me that this is not unrelated to the fact that Musk has accused Trump of being on the Jeffrey Epstein list. There's now saying there is no Jeffrey Epstein list. There was obviously a Jeffrey Epstein list, but there's a whole shutdown now.
Well, that is interesting
people.
Because there's a big story in the States at the moment of what Trump is doing to the FBI, and he has essentially gutted it. He's taken out all the people who were involved in investigating the January the 6th rioters, for example, seem to have now lost their jobs. They're not investing corporate crime anymore, not doing that. They're mainly now an immigration agency, the FBI. So it might be, you raise a very good point, that Andrew has benefited from the FBI basically not doing the Epstein style of story. So I guess we could be more suspicious then.
Absolutely.
You both agree? You seem to agree on this.
I think the victims, first of all, I mean, as you saw in one of the articles there, the victims' outcry is actually something that we need to take very, very seriously.
Yeah.
And yes, and it just doesn't, for me, it doesn't sit comfortably with the royal family, who have been brilliant, especially after the new king just come in and had the cancer diagnosis of both the Princess of Wales as well. So I do think that we need to start thinking about those victims, not just of what's happening here, but in general, sex trafficking victims around the world. I think that's the key there. And I think if justice can be served, it should be served. But this has been tainted, and I think Prince Andrew should not be coming back to royal duties.
Let's talk to Barry in Kent. You think he should not be coming back, Barry, or is this kind of the end of the matter?
No, I think I don't think he should come back into royal duties. There's no smoke without fire, and that he's paying these millions to this poor young girl. I don't think he should come back at all. He has a certain amount of alleged arrogance as well about his person.
That's not alleged. Yeah, we know that's true.
And also the other thing is, I know this is going off sorry slightly, but Epstein died in prison. I've always had a bit of a suspicion about that, as if, did he know so much, and did he have a private diaries, all this sort of thing? Did he know that there were other people involved at that higher, echelon of people? Perhaps he knew more than, and he could have...
There's a verb to be Epstein now, which means that someone kills you and makes it look like a suicide.
Absolutely.
But I'm just anti-conspiracy theorist, but some of them are true.
But that is a very, very murky area.
Yes, it is.
Really
How do you get to hang yourself in as a high-profile prisoner in that place?
Well, exactly. And because there are so many important and famous and rich men who were involved.
Clinton, who knows?
All of those. And Trump.
Yeah.
Trump has been,
but
on
we
the
don't
planes.
know. We just don't know. We may never know. We will never know.
Well, I hear there's going to be the video of Epstein's last steps are going to be released, I heard, recently. So maybe something that will clear some of the conspiracy theories.
Well, I don't
but
know.
Would you trust him?
But the thing is about with Andrew is who on earth would want him back? I mean, when he was... Before all this fuss, he was really known as a kind of boorish oaf, kind of entitled and completely, rocketing around the world, playing golf and,
He was a trade envoy, and what we have unfortunately learnt is that he was doing deals for himself, which is unforgivable.
Yeah.
Like finding a buyer for his so-called South York house and so on.
Kazakhstan.
But now under the king, we have a more streamlined royal family anyway. So there isn't really a space for Prince Andrew to come back in because we want to be streamlined. I think Prince George is nearing
George
a good
could
old
be on the
age
track
where
soon,
where he could start doing some duties at some point when he finishes school.
He's very young.
Was he 12 or something?
He's not even that.
Listen,
but back in the day, they'd have 4-year-olds opening things.
Well,
we had a king who was 6.
You say streamlined. I mean, it's more streamlined than they want. But when
Harry, Meghan, Catherine.
Well, the last balcony appearance, they dragged out the Duke and Duchess of Gloucester, who was somewhere between sort of 75 and the hereafter.
They do
It's a
need
family.
personnel.
And you think, who on earth are they?
Well, Anne was doing everything until she fell off her horse recently.
So
Thank you, Barry.
They are in trouble. They are in deep trouble.
But it looks efficient, though. But I mean, he could be what they call a make weight, where... OK. Sharon in Staffordshire, hi.
Good morning, Jeremy. And it's so lovely to see Nina, and the new man on your panel is absolutely fantastic.
Good. I'm glad you. They don't always agree, it's fair to say. Go on.
I agree with everything that Nina has said. Hell no, he should never come back to royal duties. No way. And if he does, I think it's then that we need to get rid of the monarchy completely.
Well, it's funny. Every single person who said this, I think if you're Andrew's PR person, and goodness only knows who that is, I think you'd despair, because I would have thought someone would ring in to say, look, he has not been found guilty in a court. And in fact, the FBI aren't even going to pursue anything. So, and he's quite good at opening gates, as we can see there. He's practiced that.
No, but Jeremy, look what this man has done. Look at that shambolic interview. Look at what that poor young woman has gone through until she committed suicide. What more do we need to see and hear about this man, Andrew? No, definitely not. He does not need to come back. No.
It's just the fairness element of it is what's troubling me, is whether we're convicting him before. Say again?
No, Jeremy, there's no fairness in it. That lady, Maxwell, she is in prison. Epstein, he was in prison. Why is Andrew not in prison? Tell me why. Because he's a royal. That's why.
Okay. Yeah, he's not in prison because he's a royal. But the FBI would probably have liked to indict him. I think previously, prior to Trump.
They tried.
Yeah, but I think maybe they
couldn't do it. But I must agree with you, Sharon. And I know that Ron is a huge fan of the royal family. I am less so. Charles, I can't think of Camilla as my queen. Charles has proved himself to be a better king than I thought. William, I have absolutely no time for. So what does that leave us with?
I'm told someone has rung the programme who backs Andrew. So we're going to hear the argument. We've got to balance this, because if you are him, okay, maybe he shouldn't have paid that money. Maybe because that was an admission. If somebody comes up to you and makes some ridiculous allegation, you're just going to say, it's not true.
But you don't.
He paid 12 million. Walter in Lincolnshire, tell us why you think he needs a second chance here.
Because we have a justice system where people have to be proved guilty.
Yep.
People are condemning him on a photograph. I've got a picture of my late wife with Noel Gallagher, where he posed for his arm round her, and she was smiling.
Oh.
But that was a pose for a photograph.
I hear you.
Yeah? The girl was smiling, and she was having a photograph with a royal. Yeah?
Yep. That's all we've got. I mean, she was a victim of trafficking, and she was passed from one man to another by a paedophile. Although you could equally argue Epstein never got convicted of that.
But then, Walter, there's far more evidence. I mean, he's been photographed with Epstein after Epstein was a convicted paedophile.
Yes, he was convicted. Right.
So years after
he went and stayed in Epstein's flat to break off our friendship.
Yes, and there are photographs, and that house in Manhattan, where
goodness,
was an absolute hotbed of
I don't even
whatever.
want to know what was going on. The police should have been crawling over that.
Walter, there's far more.
But Walter's done well. He's the only one who's come in and said, "Look, Andrew needs a second chance." Yeah, there's probably a job free as his PR guy, Walter. Later, it's the papers and everything else.